Okay, there. Come on. Oh. You gotta take a jump. No. How much time? We'll stand really close to you. It's okay. 20 minutes. Some questions. Well. Can I have the one that works, please? We need, hey Joe, we need a battery.
It sounds like it.
It's red on it, so there's batteries. Hi, good morning. It's my privilege to introduce Larry Robinson as our guest speaker. Larry was born in Tiburon and came to Sonoma County in 1976. I can say that if I want to.
You can, but it's not true.
Well, that's what's in your wiki. Did you write that? Okay. Sacramento said. Did you go to UC Santa Cruz? Okay. And in 1969, he earned his master's in family and marriage counseling therapy from Sonoma State. He worked as a psychotherapist for 20 years and is now retired, doing lots of great things. He served on the Sebastopol City Council from 1998 to 2010, including serving as mayor from 2001 and 2004-05. During those periods, he was part of the Green Party majority on the City Council. Larry founded and produces Rumi's Caravan, an evening of poetry in the ecstatic tradition? Ecstatic tradition, thank you. All of the performances raise money for nonprofits. A review quote for you. For years, many of us have been enjoying the daily email poems sent to us by Sebastopol poet Larry Robinson. Larry is a proponent of the oral tradition as well, hosting oral poetry salons and participating in Rumi's Caravan events. Larry has a book, I don't know how new it is. A year old, so it's relatively new. Roll Away the Stone, featuring 40 poems written over 20 years. Larry currently serves on the local boards of the Meridian University and Center for Climate Protection. Climate Protection's mission is to inspire, align, and mobilize action in response to mobile crisis. Today, Larry is going to be speaking about climate change, and I also want to add 3 other additional quick notes. He's a consummate pottery maker. I have a lot of his things, and many of you might have that as well. He also is a charter member of the Coach's Corner Travelers Club, along with myself, Jim, and Brian. Brian, you still here? Of which we talk about our international travels together. And last thing, he and his wife are kind enough to watch Peanut daily from time to time. Larry, thank you very much.
Can we give him a good sunrise welcome?
Totally.
How do you do, Mr. Speaker? How do you do? Is there anything that we can do for you? Thanks for coming here today. We are with you all the way. How do you do, Mr. Speaker? How do you do?
Thank you. Well, to answer that question, I'm doing better than I deserve. And it's a delight to be here and see so many old friends and hopefully new friends. So those of you who know me know that I can't talk without doing a poem every once in a while. So this one I'm going to offer you as kind of a startup. Han Shan, that great and crazy Chinese poet 1,000 years ago, said we're all like bugs in a bowl. I say, that's right. Every day, climbing up the side, sliding back down over and over again. So, sit in the bottom of the bowl, head in your hands, moan, cry, feel sorry for yourself. Or, look around. Greet your fellow bugs. Say, hey, how are you doing? Say, nice bowl. So, what I want to talk about is, that was by David Budbill. So, what I want to talk about this morning is this nice bowl that we find ourselves in and our fellow bugs. You know, I had told Terry that I wanted to speak about the pursuit of happiness, and that's what until last night, that's what I would prepared for. But I woke up in the middle of the last night, and I thought, with what is going on with the fires and the hurricanes and the floods and the monsoon floods inundating 1/3 of Bangladesh, and how can I not talk about the calamity that we are in the midst of? And you know, so many of us in this bubble that we're in understand what's happening. And we wonder why the general public is not getting more engaged in this issue. And we think, well, with Irma and Harvey and these droughts and fires and floods, surely that's going to make people realize that there's something going on that we need to give our attention to. I would like to think that too, but what I've learned from studying psychology for many years and being engaged in social change movements and political advocacy is that victims of natural disasters don't want to talk about the cause of the natural disaster. Climate disasters actually activate coping mechanisms that make it more likely for people to deny climate change once the immediate crisis is past. If you have survived something traumatic like that, there is something in human nature that makes us think, maybe I've been chosen to survive. And then we tend to think that we are invulnerable. And that leads us to think that future extreme events will also be survivable. It's a fallacy in our thinking, but it's something in human psychology that we need to take into account. Another phenomenon, psychological phenomenon, is something called confirmation bias, which means that we interpret experiences and events based on what we already know or what we already believe or how we want things to be. So if we are already inclined to believe that climate change is a hoax perpetuated by the Chinese to destroy the American economy, then we regard variable and extreme weather as proof that weather can be naturally variable and extreme. If we are disposed to accept that climate change is real and a growing threat, we're liable to regard it as evidence of a growing destabilization. So these extreme weather events really don't change our minds. They confirm how we already see things. What changes people's minds is much more who they hear information from rather than what they hear. We tend to believe what people we trust tell us. Friends, neighbors, peers, relatives. Science itself then becomes infected with social meaning. And we tend to identify with our own tribe, our own group, people who believe what we believe, who see the world the way we see it. And the messenger then is far more important than the message itself. Another factor that makes it so hard to change mass public opinion about something so enormous as climate change is social conformity. Everybody wants to go along to get along. So we tend to adjust our experiences and our opinions to fit in with those people who are around us. And even if we see that we're wrong, the social cost of admitting a mistake and the effort required to change our behavior may be so great that it's actually easier just to continue with something that you know is not true. Another factor is that climate change is so big, it seems like something that's in the future, even when we're starting right now to experience the effects in the present time. But because it's so big and we can't see a simple solution to it, it's easier just to put off thinking about it, particularly when we're not in the midst of a crisis. Another contributing factor to the denial is that scientists don't speak in certainties. The nature of a scientific endeavor is to speak of probabilities rather than certainties, because science is based on curiosity and exploration and always looking for a deeper answer. Whereas our irrational mind wants simple solutions, and we want solutions that accord with our emotional experiences. But because scientists talk in terms of uncertainty and probabilities, people who are inclined to deny climate change say, well, if you can't be certain about it, why should we do anything? Why should we invest anything in changing our way of life now? Why should we expend anything to save future generations from something that may or not happen? But why do we buy insurance? If you knew there was a 90% chance that your house was going to burn, you would buy insurance. If you thought there was a 1% chance your house would burn, you would buy insurance. If you thought there was 1 in 1,000 chance, you would still probably buy insurance. So why aren't we buying insurance against climate change? By taking the action we need to today, it's because it seems so far in the future. And also because it's not on our radar on an everyday basis, because we're not talking about it. And one of the reasons we don't talk about it is because we're frightened. And putting out doomsday scenarios to people doesn't inspire them to get involved or take action. When people feel threatened and isolated, they can adopt a whole range of strategies to diminish their sense of fear. Denial, uncertainty, playing down the threat, fatalism, anger towards whoever is trying to speak to you. And it's related to our fear of death. We have a taboo in our culture, and in most cultures, of speaking about death and speaking about what we fear. And we still prepare for our deaths. I think probably everybody here has a will and a trust. You're thinking about your children, your grandchildren. Complacency in the face of potential calamity, trusting that someone else is going to fix it, is also one of the great risks. What I call perilous optimism, the idea that there is a simple solution if I just change my light bulbs, or if I just use less water, or ride my bicycle everywhere, that will be all that's necessary. Or that science is going to figure out an answer, somebody's going to come up with the answer and I can just go on with my life. And we do. We do want to go on with our lives. We have our families to take care of, we have our work, we have our neighborhoods, we have our community, and it's absolutely important we attend to those responsibilities too. And there's also a phenomenon called a finite pool of worry. There's only so much that we can worry about. So we have to choose. But climate change is not something that's in the future. I think all of us in this room probably know that it is happening now. And we need to prepare, and we need to start adapting our individual lives, our community infrastructure, our national infrastructure for a very different world. Climate change is a choice between a desirable and a catastrophic outcome. And inaction itself is a choice in favor of catastrophe. So I'm going to give you the bad news and the good news. So the bad news is that the Paris Accords and most officially adopted policies to address climate change target keeping the average global temperature from rising no more than 2 degrees Celsius, or about 4 degrees Fahrenheit. Unfortunately, our current emissions level puts us on a target, on a track for 4 degrees Celsius, or 8 degrees Fahrenheit. Even if we stop burning all fossil fuels today, a 2 degree Celsius rise is already baked into the system. There's no way to stop that. At the same time, it's hard to find any scientists who consider a 4 degree increase as anything less than catastrophic. But that is the world we need to start preparing for. So I want to give you a brief snapshot of what a 4 degree rise in temperature, what that world will look like. The heat waves that we've been experiencing lately here are just a foretaste of that. We will be seeing heat waves of a magnitude we have never seen before. We will see the extinction of species that make up the web of life, that our species and our culture absolutely depend on. Food production. With a 4 degree rise in global temperature, we'll see a 63 to 82% drop in US production of corn, soybeans, and cotton. With 4 degrees rise, we will see a total melting of the Greenland ice sheet and probably the West Antarctic ice sheet. The combined impact of which will be raising sea levels by 32 feet or more, which means Bangladesh, Florida, so much of the world will be underwater. Most, if not all, of the coastal cities in the world will be below sea level. Now, there's some adaptations that we can make, as Holland has done, to protect against the sea level rise, to dike off our cities. But there's some areas, like Florida, for instance, that geologically are not going to be able to do that. So Florida will have to be abandoned at some point. At current emission levels, we'll probably reach a 4 degree increase by the 2070s, possibly sooner. So essentially the difference between 2 degrees and 4 degrees is human civilization as we know it. The good news. The good news is that as human beings, we are adaptable. That has been our great evolutionary trait that's allowed us to flourish and become the dominant species on this planet. if we marshal our creativity and our will, we can adapt to whatever comes to us, I believe. The other piece of good news is that we already have the technological capacity to transform our energy economy from fossil fuels to renewables. I'll go into that in just a little more detail than that. Also, most of the rest of the world understands the challenge, so we're not alone in it. And remember something that Winston Churchill said to the effect of, you can always count on the Americans to do the right thing once they have exhausted all the other possibilities. And I think we will do that. So, what can we do? You know, some people ask, what can I do in the face of all this? And I tell them, that's asking the wrong question. It's not what can I do, it's what we can do. It's what we can do together. Mostly what we need to do is break the silence, break that taboo against talking about this catastrophe that we're in. Then we can start doing something about it. All of the rational arguments that I and many of my colleagues in this work have tried to do to get people active are not doing it. And as a psychologist, I should have known that, and I'm learning more and more, that reason and logic don't motivate us. It's emotions, and it's the story that we tell ourselves about the meaning of the events and the reasons. So, a few months ago, a group of us at the Center for Climate Protection began meeting to ask ourselves, given that reason doesn't do it, how can we advance this agenda of getting public awareness to shift? Well, one of the things that I've learned from studying social movements and political movements is that you don't need to get everybody. In fact, 3 to 5% of the population committed and convicted is all that is necessary to really change the direction of a society. It was less than that, less than 3% of Americans who led the American struggle for independence in the 18th century. It was 3 to 5% of people engaged in the women's suffrage movement that got women the vote. It was 3% of Americans engaged in the civil rights movement that led to the Civil Rights Act and integration in the South. We don't need everybody, but we do need people who are committed and willing to do the work that's necessary. So we have embarked on a very ambitious project to raise an army of activists who are trained and committed and motivated. So next week we're starting our first prototype training group with 16 people. We had over 50 applying for this program. It's a 6-week program where we'll be training people in the actual science of climate change, how to talk intelligently about it to anyone, in public policy, how public policy is formulated and how it's impacted, how to be an effective advocate, but also how to build a fellowship. So we've been studying how religious organizations and social organizations get people activated. When I watch what you guys do, how many of you into the Cajun Festival, in the polio ride, in supporting the orphanage in Uganda. So many of these projects that ordinary citizens like Rotarians you do, we're looking at how is it you do that? So some of the key factors we're learning is the need for people to feel like they belong to something bigger than themselves. And that is what gives meaning to life. And to have an experience of fellowship, of shared core values and beliefs. And Rotary demonstrates that. And further, what churches and synagogues and temples and religious organizations do is offer a shared emotional experience and the possibility of forgiveness. So we're trying to learn from all of these how to create a fellowship of climate activists. We're calling it, our working name is this Climate Action Fellowship. And we hope after this prototype group to send them in a direction, and that focus is going to be what we call ending the ice age. ICE standing for internal combustion engine. And our plan is to get California to ban the sale of internal combustion engines by 2025, following what Germany and France and Norway and Netherlands, and now we hear China is doing that too. So you'll be hearing more about that in the future, and I'm going to leave you with one more short poem. I'm about to get the hook here. Okay. So Gary Snyder says, this is a poem called For the Children. The rising hills, the slopes of statistics lie before us. The steep climb of everything going up, up as we all go down. In the next century, or the one beyond that, they say, are valleys, pastures. We can meet there in peace if we make it. To climb these coming crests, one word to you and your children. Stay together. Learn the flowers. Go light. Thank you.
We have one further task for you if you've got time here. We had a raffle, and if you would draw the winning number here, then somebody will come up and give a card.
Number 6687927.
Rich getting richer. Diana Curtis, step right on up here. Okay. You're good. Oh, she got the Queen of Hearts. And the consolation prize today was from Lori, and it is Phillips Raw Honey.
In the wrong place. How can I get this?
And we are running a little short, so we sing the song, Joe?
Here we go. Happy trails to you, till we meet again. Happy trails to you, keep smiling on the bed. Happy trails to you, everybody we meet again.
We are adjourned. Thank you. That's it.
We're running late.
A little late, my lad.